Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar number 13. Promise it's not going to be too bad, especially because it's not Friday right now, but who knows what it is for you. So, just to remind you, we are still in the mini series of talking about the sexual exploitation bill by Dame Diane Johnson. And this is our third installment in the series. We have already talked about what 10-minute bills are. We have talked about the specific bill that Dame Diana Johnson introduced. And today we are going to talk about why this bill is happening. So let's see what we have to say.
Okay, so if you want to go to the next slide. We're going to be talking a lot about, I've made like a timeline of the Nordic model, but before we start, you should know that it's also got a bunch of other names. It seems pretty much designed to trip you up. So if you see any of these other synonyms, the equality model, sex buyer law, client criminalization is sort of one of the newer ones, but all of these essentially encompass the same thing in practice. So it's been around for a while now. It's first introduced in 1999 in Sweden as part of a Violence Against Women Act, and then Norway followed suit in 2009 as part of a sex buyer law. So you'll notice that these legislation names are all sort of based around violence against women, sex buyers. You'll hear these sort of phrases a lot. Because it's generally supported by abolitionists, radical feminists, and Christian fundamentalists. So the kind of people who are basically, the stance is that prostitution is always violence against women, is always unsafe, and therefore should be eradicated to achieve gender equality, which seems like quite a reasonable stance to have. But yeah, due to the marginalization of sex workers, it means that our voices are not heard, they are not represented, and if we do speak out publicly, there is a lot of backlash. A lot of sex workers have been harassed and abused online and in other spaces when they speak publicly about the problems that follow along with the Nordic model. But like I say, it's been going on for a while. If we skip to the next slide, we'll move up into the noughties up to 2019. So there's been quite a few attempts to make the Nordic model law in the UK. The Scottish government rejected it in 2010 and again in 2012 because the proposed purchase of sex bill, you'll hear these kinds of phrases a lot, needed to undergo a period of consultation. And so they decided that it wasn't the right time. However, what you find a lot is when other countries introduce the Nordic model, there always seems to be a renewed effort, if you like, to try and push it through Parliament in the UK. So when France introduced it in 2013, lots of MPs, women's groups, EU officials, they were all pushing for it quite hard. But the Home Office said, nope, there's no plans to review laws. I think at that point, they were focusing on a modern slavery bill, which didn't quite make the cut either. But then in 2016, Jeremy Corbyn, that man can say anything and get destroyed for it. He said that he was supporting decriminalization of the sex industry and was met with a huge amount of backlash from MPs. Harriet Harman in particular tweeted that women should be protected and men prosecuted, which sums up the attitude very, very neatly. It's very much about protecting women and in later years, protecting women and girls. It's been quite consistent. The debates sort of come in waves, so it's not new by any means, but we've seen a lot of other countries introduce the Nordic model. In the meantime, you've got places like Ireland, Canada, France, they all followed suit. And whenever that happens, we see a renewed effort to see if it can go through here in the UK. But if we move on a little bit further, on to the next slide. In 2020, obviously the pandemic happened and is still happening. It has absolutely destroyed a lot of income for sex workers. It's really really made things hard. We've talked about this a lot previously, so I'm not going to talk about it too much. But basically what's happening is that when the lockdown happened, sex workers were basically much more visible. They found it harder to work discreetly, especially street sex workers. Obviously, if no one's outside, if no one's on the streets, then a street-based sex worker is going to stick out like a sore thumb. So we saw a huge increase in brothel raids and arrests. And then in April 2020, Sarah Champion, Diane Abbott, and some other Nordic Model supporters appealed to the Home Secretary for support, stating that the pandemic heightens the vulnerability by those who are sexually exploited and those who sell sex. So they are very aware of the fact and the effects that the pandemic has had on sex workers and on marginalised identities. We've seen quite a big attitude change towards we need to protect the vulnerable in our society during the pandemic, whether it's people who are elderly or if they're high risk for COVID, people who are relying on benefits, people who are relying on free school meals. We've seen a lot of outcry that we need to protect the most vulnerable in our society, who are in the most dire situations due to the pandemic. So there has been a lot of media reporting on the impact that it's had on sex workers. There's been a lot more, we've been a lot more visible, a lot more attention has been given to us, but it's still quite difficult to have your voice heard and respected as a sex worker. A lot of these debates will shut sex worker voices down, saying that there's no way that we could possibly consent to this industry and the jobs that we do. So it's becoming quite a savior complex almost. So that's where we are. Yeah, we're a lot more in the limelight. We've had a lot more attention than usual. We've been a lot more visible than usual, but unfortunately so far all that has done for sex workers is made sure that we are more likely to be arrested. So that's where we are. That's sort of the history of the Nordic model and how it came to be such a big movement in the UK. I'm going to pass you over now for the last slide. That's it. We're done.
Hi there. So do bear in mind that NUMSIL has support services out there. So from 9 to 5, from Monday to Friday, we've got caseworkers on call. So the number's on the screen for you. You can also get in touch to our Twitter or our other services. More of that is available on screen. We also have an online chat service now. And do bear in mind, we have food vouchers in case you're having difficulty with certain costs during the COVID pandemic. Thank you very much and speak to you soon.